Hello and welcome to another episode of Vagamon VC. Before jumping into this episode, just a few housekeeping notes. This will be the last episode of Season 1, which was focused entirely on Latin America. Traveled around for the last 6 months and to several different countries within the region. The next season will be focused on Africa. I will be traveling there in around April timeframe. I'm spending the next couple months getting together my plans and all the logistics around that. So if anyone in my audience has any suggestions for any VCs or startup founders in the African ecosystem that they think would be a good fit for the show, please reach out to me directly. On to today's episode. Today's guest is Justin Schwartz. He is the Managing Director at Impaqto, based in Quito, Ecuador. What I really liked about this episode is Justin's focus on actual impact investing, which is something I've been focusing on in my personal career. And also, he is a first-time fund manager raising Impaqto's first VC fund. So it's interesting to get his perspective as a first-time manager within the Latin American ecosystem. One quick note, we did do this interview together while I was in Quito at one of Impaqto's co-working spaces. There is a bit of an echo just due to the conference room we were in, some bad audio engineering on my part, so apologies for that. But overall, the interview was great. The content is really good, so I hope you enjoy the episode. So without any further delay, I give you Justin Schwartz. All right, everybody. I'm here with Justin Schwartz. He is the Managing Director of Impaqto, based in Quito, Ecuador. Justin, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Zev. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So first, I want to start with you. What is your background and how did you get involved in venture capital and startups?
Sure. It's been a little bit of a journey to get where I am today. I started my career working for Fidelity Investments in Boston, a mutual fund company, as an analyst, investing in public companies and doing all of the analysis, quantitative and qualitative analysis that comes with that, deciding where to invest shareholders' money. But of course, in big companies, which is a very different context than where I am today, but learned a lot about investing and about business strategy. Really enjoyed it, but after close to 5 years, wanted to do something different, was interested in social impact and also what was going on in developing countries. And I did a lot of reading about the potential of entrepreneurship to contribute to development around the world, and got really excited about that, particularly microfinance at that time, and decided to take a leap. I moved to Sierra Leone in West Africa, worked there for Kiva, which is the crowdfunding platform for microfinance, worked with some of their local partners there, working with micro-entrepreneurs in that context, who were getting small loans to help grow their businesses, and really enjoyed it a lot, learned a lot about what entrepreneurial needs are, the importance of access to capital, but in a very specific context in Sierra Leone, which is, of course, one of the poorest countries in the world. I finished that work and I'd been following what was going on in entrepreneurship in developing countries around the world, and was really fascinated by what I was reading about Latin America, and decided I need to be a part of that. I want to be in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Latin America. I had traveled a little bit in Latin America and really enjoyed it from a personal perspective, and was excited about the prospect of living there, and also spoke Spanish. So the sort of combination of those different factors led me there, and that was a little over 3 years ago, and I've been in Quito for 3 years now, working in Impaqto.
So I've been here for almost 6 months, and then prior to COVID, a little bit of time. My Spanish, I'm still really rusty on, so maybe you can give me some lessons. But so you were specifically focused on Latin America, but why Ecuador?
I really went through kind of a discovery process of looking at different opportunities in Latin America, understanding the ecosystems of different countries, and talking to different actors. And what drew me to Ecuador was actually Impaqto, which we'll get into a little bit more of what Impaqto does. But Impaqto had built such a fascinating company, doing really amazing work supporting entrepreneurs based in Ecuador, but working throughout the region with a really great network throughout Latin America. And I saw an opportunity to join an organization that was growing and doing really interesting work, and also to really have an impact in the ecosystem. And Ecuador is a small ecosystem. 3 years ago, it was even more early stage than it is today. And so the ability of one person to really be a part of an ecosystem and have an impact is greater in a country like that. So it was really this opportunity that brought me here.
And so you mentioned we're going to jump into Impaqto, so let's go ahead and take the opportunity to do that now. So what is the background of Impaqto? What specifically does Impaqto do? And give me some idea around like how specifically you are contributing to the ecosystem here.
Sure. So Impaqto was founded 8 years ago by Michelle Arevalo Carpenter and Daniela Peralvo, two Ecuadorian women, with the goal of pushing forward the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Ecuador with a specific focus on social entrepreneurs. So Impaqto was the first certified B Corp in Ecuador. We now have a thriving community of about 25, I believe. But that part, the social environmental impact, has always been a part of the vision. So the company was born with this vision of supporting entrepreneurs, has evolved over time, and right now we're supporting entrepreneurs really in 4 ways. We provide them community through co-working spaces. We operate 5 co-working spaces in 3 different cities in Ecuador. We have an accelerator program called Impaqto Lab that we run. We're part of the Google for Startups network, so it's a key partnership that we have the support of Google in the accelerator, and we work with social impact startups from throughout Latin America to help scale their business and their impact. We've worked with 250 startups from 10 countries in Latin America in the accelerator over the years. The third area where we work, we call it consulting, and really it has to do with connecting entrepreneurs with corporations, with NGOs, with multilaterals through different projects. So social entrepreneurship programs focus on specific industries based on the needs of an NGO or a company, or an entrepreneurship program focused on a specific kind of entrepreneurs or a specific region. These sorts of programs that we do based on the needs of different organizations. And the last area is based on investment and access to capital. So we organize CLIC, which is the Latin America Impact Investment Summit. We've been organizing for 4 years based here in Quito. It's the largest and most important impact investing event in the Andean region, with a focus on the Andean region of South America. And then the newest part of Impaqto, which is the part that I'm leading now, is Impaqto Capital, which is our impact investing fund that we just launched at the beginning of this year. So everything we do, we're doing a lot of different things, work in 4 or 5 different areas, but all with the mission of, we call ourselves an ecosystem builder, and we're looking to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and particularly the social entrepreneurial ecosystem throughout Latin America.
Yeah, you touched on a couple different points there because you mentioned you're doing these different activities, so I want to dive into a few of them. How does Impaqto, you mentioned you focus on like social impact, right? So how does Impaqto specifically define what social impact is, and how does it translate to these activities, maybe in terms of the startups you actually bring into the accelerator or in the co-working space or consulting?
It's a good question, and it can be somewhat philosophical, but I personally kind of think of 3 different areas of impact that a company can have. One is providing goods or services to vulnerable populations as customers. The second is including vulnerable populations in the supply chain of the company. And the third is the broad category of environmental impact. So to maybe to be a little more specific, thinking about the industries that we see most often in our accelerator, we work a lot with startups in ed tech, having an impact in education, in health tech, innovating in health, also in the ag supply chain, food and beverage, and different parts of the ag supply chain that are working with a lot of smallholder farmers or indigenous communities. We also see a lot of sustainable fashion companies working with artisans in different areas. And recently we're seeing a lot more on the environmental side, renewable energy, water, circular economy. So we define impact pretty broadly and see a lot of different industries, but I think there's really a lot of potential for for-profit companies to have a big impact in Latin America.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it can be a little philosophical, so it's great to see. And I think I've mentioned you actually on the side because I work for SeedStars, right, as my full-time job. So we also do our own thing, trying to find impact. What does that mean? How does that set the parameters for our company? It can be difficult to do, right, because it can be such a, like you mentioned, philosophical or broad term. But it's nice to see that you have actually kind of created an outline, or at least parameters or a framework to actually use that to drive these activities. How does that also influence your relationships that you build with other stakeholders in the industry? So, for example, some of the corporations that you are working with or these NGOs that you're partnering with to do these consulting projects, or even some of the LPs that you're currently engaging with for the fund, or even from the accelerator, the people that you're engaging with to invest in these startups. How does it drive those upstream relationships as well?
It's a good question, and it really, I think, it highlights our role as a nexus of the ecosystem. Really broadly speaking, defining entrepreneurial ecosystem in Latin America, and we love to be connectors, and we connect a lot of different actors in the ecosystem. So we see, because of the impact focus, I think we see a lot of different angles that maybe other actors don't see. For example, we work with NGOs and multilateral organizations that are used to generating impact through grants. But we're seeing more and more interest from those organizations in thinking about the sustainability and the scalability of that impact. And for-profit companies and entrepreneurship allow for that sustainability and scalability in a way that grant funding and philanthropy don't. And so we're starting to do more and more projects with those sorts of organizations that see the potential of entrepreneurship as a way to achieve their impact goals. On the other side of things, we have a really large community of investors that we work with, impact investors and traditional VCs. CLIC, the Impact Investing Summit I mentioned, brings together a lot of those investors. We usually have 25 or 30 different funds that come to Quito for the event, about 200 people in total from the ecosystem. And so we do a lot of connecting on that side. And I think we're seeing more and more traditional VCs think about ESG in their investing and think about impact in how they do things. And I think just kind of by definition, a lot of entrepreneurship in a region like Latin America has a deep impact because there's a lot of basic services that aren't provided, which maybe in a developed country would be provided by the government. And so you see the private sector and entrepreneurs innovating in how to provide some of these services, like I mentioned, education and health being two great examples. Fintech, of course, is a growing category. Financial inclusion has a really great impact. And so I think we're in an interesting moment in the ecosystem where we're seeing a lot of actors sort of move in this direction of thinking about impact entrepreneurship, and we're happy to be connecting them with each other.
And let's get more into the details and the actual format of some of the things you're doing. So the Accelerator, for example, how is the program structured? Are you running multiple programs at once? Are you focused on different areas in Latin America at once, different SDGs or actual sectors in each program? What does that look like? And also, how is it structured in terms of the timeline, what you guys are providing to some of the entrepreneurs that participate in the program, investments, things like that?
Sure. So our Accelerator program, as I mentioned, we've now worked with 250 companies in the program. It's evolved over the years. Right now, Impaqto Lab, which is the name of our flagship Accelerator program, is we run twice a year with cohorts of about 15 to 20 startups, and the cohorts are open. So we have startups from all over Latin America. We have startups from a variety of industries, and we see a lot of value in the community that's built by connecting those startups. It's a 15-week program, so about 3.5 months. Really, really intense for the founders. We expect a lot from them. We expect them to take advantage of the resources, and we focus on all of the tools and knowledge that they need to be able to grow their startup. So everything from a diagnostic of the current state of the company and kind of the creation of the strategy of the company to, at the end of the program, really focused on raising capital and investment readiness. And the idea is that the founders and the startups leave that program with accelerated growth and more prepared for the future, and also a better understanding of their impact metrics and measurement is a key part of the program as well. That's the format. We don't invest through our Accelerator, nor do we take equity. We charge the entrepreneurs a small fee to participate, and we cover, which is really only a portion of the cost and the value of the program. We cover the rest with grant funding and other cross subsidies from other programs.
Now, on the actual investment piece, you mentioned that you are currently in the process of developing a new focus for Impaqto, which is raising a venture capital fund. So would you be able to tell me some of that process, what's it been like, basically raising this fund, one from an impact standpoint, because I think you mentioned that some of the people you're associated with are now focusing more on this ESG stuff. It's definitely becoming more popular. Maybe there have been some misconceptions around ESG investing in the past, so maybe some changes there in terms of raising from an impact focus, but also from an Ecuador focus. What's it like raising a fund here located in Ecuador?
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning experience for us over the past 12 months as we've been set out on this journey, but we're really excited about taking this step as the next step in the journey of Impaqto. So the fund, Impaqto Capital, really comes out of all of the work that we have done previously in terms of the Accelerator, in terms of the Impact Investing Summit, and understanding really deeply the needs of entrepreneurs and where the gaps are in their access to capital. So the fund really has two basic points to the thesis. One is that we're addressing what's called the missing middle of financing, which refers to the fact that in Latin America, microfinance is a very well-developed industry. So for a micro-entrepreneur looking for a loan of, let's say, $500, there's a lot of options of microfinance institutions to get that capital. On the other end, we're seeing more and more funds, international funds, global funds interested in Latin America, but they tend to enter, VC funds I'm referring to, but they tend to enter at the Series A, which means their minimum ticket might be $1 million, and the company needs to be at a certain level to raise that capital. Everything in between is the missing middle. For seed funding in Latin America, the industry is really very nascent, and we see a lot of challenges there. So we're looking to fill that gap. Our investment tickets are between $50,000 and $200,000, which is really where we see a lot of entrepreneurs struggling to raise capital. The other point of the thesis is we like to say that venture capital isn't for everyone. We love to see the amount of attention that VC in Latin America has gotten, the increasing amount of capital that's coming here. But to raise venture capital, you really need two things in the company. One, you need to have exponential growth and the potential to be a 10x, 20x company. And two, you need to be looking for an exit or open to an exit within the lifetime of the fund. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs in Latin America, we work with a lot of them, that don't meet those requirements because they have a company that has really interesting growth, but it might not have the potential to be a 10 or 20x company. And we see a lot of companies entrepreneurs who want to build companies for the long run, and they're not looking for an exit. And so we talk about the concept of zebra companies, which are these companies that are not the unicorns that are growth at all costs, but they're more balanced, maybe growing a little slower, but more profitably, and taking into account their community and their stakeholders and the impact portion of that. And so our fund looks to fund those sorts of companies. It's a revenue-based financing fund, which, without getting too technical, basically means that we take a percentage of the revenue that entrepreneurs generate, and we have a structured exit as part of that investment structure, which doesn't force an exit on behalf of the founder. And so it allows us to address a segment which is massive in Latin America and in the Andean region where we're focused. It really isn't being addressed by typical VC funds. I think the second part of your question is about the experience fundraising, which I think anyone who's listening who has fundraised, and if you ask any fund manager, fundraising is always twice as hard and takes twice as long as you think it will. So I think that our experience definitely fits with that since January when we started fundraising. We have been really happy with the progress we've made, and we're taking a little bit of a different approach as compared to a lot of funds where 95% of the capital that we have committed at the moment is local capital in the Andean region, which if you look at VC funds or even impact funds in Latin America, the majority of the capital comes from the global north. And we see an opportunity. We see a lot of people with capital in Latin America. Why aren't they supporting the local entrepreneurial ecosystem? And so we've been talking with a lot of local business people, doing a lot of education, honestly, because the concept of investing in venture capital and investing in an impact investing fund is still really new for a lot of these business people. But we've been doing that education, getting them excited, and have a really good group of LPs on board for the fund. So we're excited. When we talk about ecosystem building, it's sort of another, we're raising capital for a fund, but it's another way to build an ecosystem of impact investors in the region.
So that's an interesting segue away from Impaqto and actually into the ecosystem here, right? Because you mentioned a couple of things. When I've been looking at Latin America, and I've been traveling around here, and obviously speaking with many individuals around here, you get the big markets such as Mexico and Brazil. That's like everyone wants to go there and expand. And then you have some of these other players that are really up and coming that get mentioned, like Colombia, Chile's got some places, got some smaller markets like Peru, and then Ecuador doesn't really pop up as much, right? So let's start from a startup perspective, and then we'll get to a funding perspective. What are some of the kind of roadblocks or maybe even misconceptions about the market here, the startup market here in Ecuador?
Sure, I completely agree with your premise, and just to put some numbers on the table that back that up. If you look at VC funding in Latin America, 80% goes to Mexico and Brazil, and if you add Colombia, Chile, and Argentina, that's 95% of VC funding in Latin America. So that's 5 countries, and Latin America has something around 25 countries. So there's a lot of small markets that aren't getting the attention from the funders. And we actually put out a report a few years ago called The Second Wave, which talked about kind of the second wave of capital that would be coming to the secondary markets in Latin America. But focusing on Ecuador and your specific question, we've seen the startup ecosystem really evolve a lot over the 8 years that Impaqto has been working here, and I think there's a few different factors. One is the cultural factor and the willingness to take risks on the part of entrepreneurs, which has been something that's been improving over the past few years in Ecuador, but we're still building an entrepreneurial culture, and I think that will come with time, and we're starting to see an exit here or there of entrepreneurs who have been successful, who then tend to be those mentors and those role models for future entrepreneurs. The other challenge that Ecuador has had historically is that it's difficult to do business in the country. To say it that way, the ease of doing business ranking from the World Bank that I think we all are familiar with, Ecuador is embarrassingly low on that list. So there's a lot of work to be done on the regulatory and legal and political side to improve that. We don't want to get political, but hopefully that can improve over time. And then I think the other thing is really the access to capital, which I talked about the missing middle. Remember, Ecuador is a small market, 17 million people, GDP of 100 billion. Really a small market, and so a lot of foreign investors who might invest in Ecuador are only willing to invest in a company, in a startup, once it's gotten to that level. And we've seen a few that have gotten to that level. Kushki is our example in Ecuador that recently this year raised a round at a $600 million valuation. It's a fintech company and is providing that example to a lot of Ecuadorian entrepreneurs. So on the access to capital front, we really need to fill this missing middle and get entrepreneurs the seed capital they need to be able to get to the Series A level and start to attract attention from international investors.
Let's touch on the policy piece, because I know we don't have to get too much into the actual politics of things, but are there any initiatives happening, say, with the venture community here, the startup community here? Are you partnering with the government in any way to help with any initiatives when it comes to ease of starting businesses, doing businesses in the country, that will help alleviate some of these symptoms that actually create like a new wave of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's something that we're really excited about, that I'm personally really excited about, is just a couple months ago we started EquiCap, which is the Association of Venture Capital and Private Equity in Ecuador. And a lot of the larger markets in Latin America have had these associations for a few years now. We're just starting with it, but we've been able to bring together different actors in the venture capital and private equity ecosystem in Ecuador, continuing to bring on more people since we're just a few months into it. We'll have a lot more news on that front in 2022, but a couple of the goals of that association, EquiCap, one is education, which I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done to really all players, business people, potential investors, entrepreneurs, and policymakers. And that'll be a part of one of the goals of EquiCap. And so to present that united front on behalf of the venture capital industry in the country, hopefully can be helpful in pushing some of those things forward.
And on the second part I wanted to explore was on when we talk about startup funding, and let me know if I misinterpreted this, but basically some of these capital providers don't really want to get involved until they can see a startup has demonstrated, let's call it like a market expansion. So are they actually waiting to see, has this startup been able to enter Mexico or enter Brazil or Colombia, right? And actually be able to break out from the marketplace here, like you mentioned, because 17 million people, small market. So one, is that actually the correct interpretation, that they're waiting to see these companies expand to these markets? And if so, is there any advice you would give to maybe an entrepreneur who would be listening to some best practices for expanding early and be able to get that attention and growth that they need?
Definitely, that's definitely true. Ecuador is a small market. It's a great market for piloting an idea and a proof of concept, because it has some of its challenges present opportunities, because it's in a lot of industries are still pretty traditional and not very competitive and not very focused on innovation. So there's a lot of opportunity for disruption. So there's really an amazing opportunity for startups to be born in Ecuador, to develop the proof of concept and to expand to the region. What your point is 100% true. Most of the international investment funds, and even a lot of the funds based in Ecuador, really are not looking to invest in a company that's just based in Ecuador, because investors need to understand the company has the potential to compete at the regional or even the global level. And so one of the things that we work with entrepreneurs on in our Accelerator is to be thinking about regional expansion from the beginning. I think you need to refine an idea up to a certain point in Ecuador to be able to have the confidence and the strength to expand regionally, but to be thinking about that from the beginning, and also to have a regional mindset. I think one thing that we see, and this comes with the entrepreneurial culture point, one thing we see from some Ecuadorian entrepreneurs is they talk about wanting to build the best business in whatever industry in Ecuador. And we like to talk to them and say, well, why can't we set our sights higher? We can compete regionally from being based in Ecuador. Let's think that way from the beginning and have that mindset. And so the advice would really be that, to have that mindset from the beginning, to be thinking regionally from the beginning, to be speaking regionally from the beginning, and that will help a company to be able to get to that level and to attract funding from international funds.
It's funny how much attitude and mindset plays into this. Literally, I released an episode with a founder of Talently, which is, they're based in Peru, but currently expanding in Mexico, and I asked her a similar question. She said, mindset's so important, right? Of just wanting to expand and thinking regionally and thinking globally versus just in your local market. So it's funny to hear that repeated from another individual in the ecosystem. And then on the funding level, we talked a little bit about the lack of local capital. And you mentioned that you're working with maybe educating some local investors, right, on the benefits of venture capital. What are some specific things that you're doing to get the local capital providers more involved in this asset class?
Yeah, so there's a small number of venture capital funds in Ecuador, but there's really not a lot, and in some cases that capital comes from outside the country. What we see from a lot of the people with wealth in Ecuador is that they tend to have made their money, and I think this is true in a lot of Latin America, but they tend to have made their money from traditional businesses, maybe retail, maybe health, whatever the sector might be. Real estate is a big one there. And so they have that traditional business mindset, and so they are looking to invest their wealth in things that they know, which is natural. So we see a lot of people investing in real estate. We see people investing in buying traditional businesses or investing in traditional businesses. We see people taking their money and investing in, for example, the stock market in the U.S. And those sorts of less risky investments. We see, I guess one way to put it would be the appetite for risk is fairly low among the people with money. We're starting to see that change, and you asked about what we're doing. On the one hand, raising this fund has really been an educational experience, not just for us, but for the people we're the potential LPs that we're talking to explain what it's like to invest in a startup, the innovation and the disruption that's coming from startups in Ecuador and in the region, the importance of the impact of entrepreneurship and the impact of these startups in the country and in the region, and that narrative and that education is important. So that's something that we've seen firsthand just from a lot of hundreds of fundraising conversations with people locally and internationally. And I think, as I mentioned, the EquiCap and creating this association in the united front of all of the VC funds and other actors in Ecuador will be really important to help to promote that. So we're seeing it change little by little, and there's more interest every day, but we still have a lot of work to be done.
So let's continue talking about change then. As we get close to the end of the podcast, where do you see the ecosystem as it continues to evolve and change? Where do you see it 5 years from now?
5 years from now, I would love to see a few really successful Ecuadorian startups, hopefully more than a few. But I say that not just to put Ecuador on the map among international investors, but to present that example and that role model for the next generation of Ecuadorian entrepreneurs. We're talking a lot about culture and how important it is in an ecosystem, and I think we've seen in successful ecosystems, you see that cycle of entrepreneurs arriving at an exit or being successful in some other way, then giving back in the form of becoming angel investors, in the form of becoming mentors, in the form of really pushing forward entrepreneurship in other ways. So I think having more success cases will be really helpful, and I'm confident we will over the next few years. I think I'd like to see a lot more capital be invested in Ecuador, both from funds based in Ecuador and also international funds. And I think the work that we're doing, we've seen of the 6 or 7 kind of players in the funding world in Ecuador, 5 or 6 of them probably have been born in the last 2 or 3 years. And we're seeing a lot of progress on that front at the local level, and we're starting to see international VCs be more interested in Ecuador. And I think as the ecosystem evolves, and as we, from an Impaqto Capital standpoint, can fill this missing middle and push these companies, support these companies, provide the capital that they need to arrive at the Series A level and start to raise more international capital, I think we'll see more and more attention on the potential of Ecuador and the strength of the startups.
That's a nice vision. If potential LPs, other investors who would be interested in networking, co-investing, or even entrepreneurs interested in Impaqto, either the Accelerator or funding, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
They can send me an email. My email is justin@impaqto, impaqto.net. Happy to speak with anyone who's interested. To find out more about Impaqto Capital specifically, our investment fund, you can go to impaqto with a Q capital.com to learn a little bit more about our vision. The website's in Spanish, but of course happy to respond to any emails in English or Spanish.
And I'll add all that information in the show notes, so it'll be easy for people to get in touch. Justin, this has been really exciting for me. I love seeing what you guys are doing, both not just locally in the ecosystem, but from an impact focus. I think that's really important for something I've been focusing on more recently myself. So this has been a great experience to learn more about you and about Impaqto. So thank you once again for coming on the program. See you next time.
Thanks so much for having me, Zed.